Deep beneath the restless waves of the Atlantic, or perhaps buried under the ice of Antarctica, or maybe hidden beneath the shifting sands of the Sahara, lies the greatest riddle of human history. It is a name that evokes wonder, lost technology, and ultimate tragedy. Atlantis. For over 2,000 years, this story has haunted the human imagination. It is the archetype of the lost civilization, a utopia that rose to the absolute height of power only to be swallowed by the sea in a single day and night of misfortune. But where does this story actually come from? Is it a distorted memory of a real history, a philosophical thought experiment, or a map to a treasure we have yet to find? To understand the truth, we must walk the streets of the concentric city and witness the rise of the lost continent. To understand Atlantis, we must first destroy a common misconception. Atlantis does not come from hundreds of different ancient cultures. It does not appear in the Bible, or in Sumerian tablets, or in Indian Vedas. It comes from exactly one source, the Greek philosopher Plato. Around 300 BC, Plato wrote two Socratic dialogues titled Timaeus and Critias. These texts are not presented as fairy tales, but as philosophical discussions about the ideal state of governance. In the text, a character named Critias tells a story he claims has been passed down through his family for generations. He says his ancestor, the famous lawgiver Solon, traveled to the city of Sais in Egypt around 600 BC. There, Solon met with elderly Egyptian priests in the temple of the goddess Neith. The priests mocked the Greeks, calling them children with no ancient memory, because Greek history was constantly being reset by natural disasters. They told Solon that 9,000 years prior, which from our perspective would be around 9,600 BC, there was a mighty power based on an island situated in front of the Strait of Gibraltar, which the ancients called the Pillars of Hercules. The ancients described an island larger than Libya and Asia Minor combined. This was the seat of the Atlantean Empire. Plato insists, through the voice of Critias, that this is not a fiction, but a true history. Whether Plato intended this as a literal fact or a morality tale is the single biggest debate in archaeology, but he gave us so much specific detail that it is hard not to wonder if he was describing something real. According to the legend, the island was originally ruled by the god Poseidon. He fell in love with a mortal woman named Clito, who lived on a hill in the center of the island. To protect her, Poseidon carved the island into a series of concentric rings, 2 of land and 3 of water, making the central island inaccessible to man. Poseidon and Clito had 5 sets of twin sons. The eldest was named Atlas, and the ocean and the island were named after him. The descendants of Atlas built a civilization of unimaginable wealth. They were not just a primitive tribe, they were a superpower. They built massive bridges connecting the rings of land and dug a massive canal to the sea, allowing ships to sail right to the center of the city. The architecture was striking. They quarried stone from beneath the island, white, black, and red stone, which gave their buildings a vibrant striped appearance. They surrounded each ring of land with massive walls plated in precious metals. The outer wall was covered in brass, the next in tin, and the innermost wall flashed with the red light of orichalcum. Orichalcum was a red-gold metal, second in value to only gold itself, said to be mined only in Atlantis. In the very center of the city stood the temple of Poseidon and Clito. It was surrounded by a golden enclosure. Inside, the temple was covered in silver with pinnacles of gold. There stood a statue of Poseidon driving a chariot pulled by 6 winged horses, so tall his head touched the roof. The island was a paradise. 2 springs flowed from the earth, one hot and one cold, providing abundant water. The forests were teeming with animals, including elephants. The soil was rich and the people lacked nothing. But the most interesting part of Plato's description is the government. The 10 kings of Atlantis possessed absolute power, but bound by the laws of Poseidon. Every 5 or 6 years, they would gather in the temple to perform a strange and bloody ritual. They would hunt a bull within the temple precincts without iron weapons, capturing it with nooses and clubs. They would sacrifice the bull, letting its blood drip over the sacred inscription of laws on a pillar of orichalcum. They would drink from golden cups, swear to uphold justice, and wear azure blue robes as they sat in judgment of one another. For many generations, the Atlanteans remained virtuous. They despised wealth and valued character. But, as with all great empires, it could not last. Plato writes that the divine portion of the Atlantean blood began to fade, and the human nature became dominant. They became infected with unrighteous ambition and power. They ceased to be a utopia and became a brutal, expansionist empire. This is the part of the story many people forget. Atlantis wasn't just a peaceful island that sank. It was the villain of the story. They launched a massive invasion, conquering parts of North Africa up to Egypt and Europe as far as modern Italy. They enslaved the peoples of the Mediterranean. They threatened to conquer the entire known world. Only one force stood against them: prehistoric Athens. In Plato's story, ancient Athens was just as heroic as Atlantis was villainous. The Athenians, leading a coalition of Greeks, stood alone after their allies deserted them. Through sheer bravery, they defeated the Atlantean navy and liberated the occupied lands. But the war was not the end. The gods, seeing the corruption of Atlantis, decided to punish them. Plato writes, "But afterwards there occurred violent earthquakes and floods, and in a single day and night of misfortune, all your warlike men in a body sank into the earth, and the island of Atlantis in like manner disappeared in the depths of the sea." The ocean became impassable because of the deep mud left behind. The great civilization was gone. And for centuries, that was where the story ended. Aristotle, Plato's student, famously dismissed the story, saying, "He who invented it also destroyed it." For the next 2,000 years, Atlantis was mostly viewed as a metaphor, a warning against greed and imperialism. But in 1882, everything changed. An American politician named Ignatius Donnelly published a book titled Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. Donnelly argued that Atlantis was the mother civilization. He looked at pyramids in Egypt and pyramids in the Mayan territories and claimed they were too similar to be a coincidence. He believed Atlantis was the land bridge that connected the Old World and the New World. He argued that the gods of the Greeks and Vikings were actually just the kings and queens of Atlantis, remembered through the fog of time. Donnelly's book became a bestseller. It moved Atlantis from a footnote in philosophy to the center of pseudo-archaeology. Later, mystics like Madame Blavatsky and Edgar Cayce added psychic elements, claiming Atlanteans had lasers, flying machines, and energy crystals. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, famously predicted that Atlantis would rise again in the Bahamas in the late 1960s. While no continent rose, divers did discover what looks like a man-made pavement of stones off the coast of Bimini in 1968, keeping the legend alive. So where do we stand today? Was there a real Atlantis? The most scientifically accepted theory points to the Minoan civilization. On the island of Thera, known today as Santorini, a massive volcanic eruption occurred around 1600 BC. This was one of the largest volcanic events in human history. It destroyed the island, triggered massive tsunamis that devastated the Mediterranean, and effectively ended the Minoan trading empire. The Minoans were advanced. They had multi-story buildings, complex plumbing systems, and rituals involving bulls. It is very likely that the memory of this catastrophe was recorded by the Egyptians, and over 1,000 years, the details were exaggerated until it became the legend Plato described. The timeline doesn't match perfectly, but the parallels are undeniable. However, others continue to look elsewhere. Some researchers point to the Rishat structure in Mauritania, the Eye of the Sahara. From space, it looks exactly like concentric rings. It matches the measurements of Plato's city eerily well, and the surrounding geography suggests water once flowed through it. Others look to the Azores, or submerged shelves near Cuba, or even Antarctica, suggesting the ice caps cover the ruins of the lost city. So where do we stand today? Was there a real Atlantis? Was it the Minoans, a sunken land in the Atlantic, or purely a warning about the corrupting nature of power? The result is the same. Atlantis reminds us that civilizations are fragile. We build our towers, we write our laws, and we believe we are eternal. But the ocean is always waiting. The story of Atlantis is not just about the past, it is a mirror for the future. It asks us a simple question. If a civilization as great as Atlantis could fall in a single night, are we any safer? The search continues, and perhaps one day the ocean will give up its secrets. But until then, the legend remains the greatest story ever told.